things about being tired but wired is that you make mistakes, and human error is a big factor in the workplace. So I'm very happy to welcome Darren Holeyman from CBRE, who's going to talk about risk management and the human factor and how we can avoid making mistakes. So here he is. Darren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Darren Holeyman. As it says, I'm a critical engineering services director on a global scale for CBRE. I'm heavily involved with a number of very large global integrated facilities management transitions and projects for very large clients, and I have probably just over 25 years experience within the critical environment arena. Today I'm going to talk to you about risk management and the human factor and how they relate. Some context around critical environment. Now, within many industries, obviously critical environments are different. For us, within most of the clients that we serve, a critical environment is deemed any environment where we have a critical infrastructure, being an engineering infrastructure that serves that environment, where the output failure of that infrastructure could potentially cause reputational or, in some cases, many cases, profit and revenue impact. So in terms of us, critical environments would be data centers. They would be predominantly trading floors within investment banking. They can be laboratories within pharmaceutical development organisations. They can be very much also life impacting if we look at hospitals and obviously the operating theatres that are within our hospitals as well. So that's where we deem a critical environment to be. Some urban myths that I'd like to share with you, and these are some things that we pick up. We pick up many comments from our clients and from customers that we work with or we support. And some urban myths we collate and we formulate, and we actually learn from those comments that we hear out in the market. Interestingly, top one there, I spent a fortune on designing my system to be resilient. And for those who don't understand what resilience is in terms of infrastructure, that is the ability for the infrastructure to return to its normal state after an impact failure. So resilience in engineering terms would normally mean redundancy within the system. So you would have two of a particular asset or component or system component. Interestingly, we hear very often the checks in the post. There's a general perception that the more money that you throw at your system, the more reliable and resilient that system will be. Interestingly there, every foreseeable event. Now, we work with risk managers, and I don't know how many of you guys out there work within risk management. We work with many risk managers in our industry, and they often say to us, we know exactly what's going to happen within our environment. What we're saying is we can predict what's going to happen in the environment, but you don't necessarily know every foreseeable event. And the reason why we say that is we've come across, in our experience, many, many instances where an event has been caused by something that you could not foresee. It was just an unforeseeable circumstance. What we do at CBRE is we learn from that and we pass that through our global knowledge network, and we learn across the whole board that whatever that event was and what the causes of that event was, that we don't repeat it in the future. For those who don't know, a Tier 4 data centre, it actually comes from the Uptime Institute, who are a global regulation who recommend standards within the data centre environment. A Tier 4 facility is in effect the most redundant and most resilient that you can actually design. And what they say is that a Tier 4 has the capability of being concurrently maintainable, and in addition to that, if there is a fault within the infrastructure, the system can carry on without any output failure. So that's what we mean by that, and that's another very interesting comment that we've had from our client base. It's impossible to acknowledge. That's not fact. Let's look at the reality. Now, if we look at these triangles here, we've got operational risk is around a number of factors, and obviously the way we look at it in CBRE is we look at three fundamental items which we call the 3 Ps, and we look at the products, we look at the actual processes and procedures that surround those products, and very key and important there is the human interface, which is the people. We also look at design and ongoing investment. So within the design itself, which we class as a product, we look at the way in which we invest for our clients going forward. But in actual fact, the reality is operational risk very, very often comes down to human element. It's the human factor and it's the interrelationship between the individual, the people, the process, and actually the products that they're operating and maintaining on behalf of the clients. So what we say is, let's understand our human factors within the site maintenance and what we do in critical sites, how that is a major element in improving the availability of the infrastructure and the services. So we spend a hell of a lot of time within CBRE understanding how our people interface with our process, procedure, and our products. Just to give you some context around the human impact and the human effect within failure. Uptime Institute, as I mentioned before, is a global industry-leading governing body over data centers. And recent statistics suggest that 73% of disruptions within the data center, and these are normally disruptions that have an output impact, are actually based on human error, which is a very, very high percentage. Again, looking at this contextually, no matter how resilient you make your infrastructure, our experience wow, where'd that go? Sorry about that. Our experience and what we've seen with clients that we work with and some of the data that we're getting back, 80% of preventable failures are actually as a result of human error or procedural failure. So what we say by that, it can be sometimes that the human error is the procedural failure. So a failure to follow a correct and certified procedure could be deemed a human error that comes into this category. But again, if you look at our own research and what we found, the common theme that comes through in all these issues here and all these impact incidents is that human error has a very, very significant impact on what we see in terms of failure rates. Interesting comment here. This is the importance of understanding people. What we say, and we don't say it openly and outwards, but we will share this with you, is that in our view, it's not always what you expect from a human interface with a product or a process. It's often what you inspect. And the reason why we say this is that we are very, very heavily involved with, I guess, awareness and learning from what we do. And my recommendation to anyone involved in critical environments is that if you generate a procedure and you certify a procedure, what you have to do, you have to ensure that you constantly inspect what that procedure is all about. So just because you certify that procedure on day one and you train an individual into carrying out that procedure, it's not appropriate to put that on the shelf and not consider it again. So what we do is we generally consider that inspection and inspecting the way we do things and how our people interact with the processes that we put in place, and what we do in terms of how we interface with our products, the whole human factor piece. We constantly inspect, we certainly don't expect. There are certain cultural behaviours that we do expect, but certainly in terms of the procedural basis, we don't expect that to be commonplace with our people out in the field. Let's look at some of the cultural things that we drive and we try and enforce with our guys that work with us within the critical engineering world. We've got some very positive cultural attributes that we share. We really try very, very hard to have an open and low blame culture. And the reason for that is our experience suggests that human error and the human factor is often the pressure that individuals at a senior level place on those individuals that are carrying out the works. So we say to our guys, look, we expect along the line there to be errors. We expect you to not understand certain things, but what we encourage you to do is to come back to us and share those experiences with us. So don't feel that you're on your own. And we won't blame you for not understanding that. We've always been in a position to understand what you're doing. And if you're open with us, we can fix those issues. We can close those gaps. If you don't share them with us, then unfortunately we can't help you along the line in terms of what you're trying to achieve. We're very, very strong on responsibility and accountability, and what you'll find within the CBRE organisation, we drive right way through the organisation that you are empowered to be responsible. Where you are accountable, you'll be empowered to be accountable. Now what that does with an individual who is constantly following strict procedures, it gives that individual the ability to challenge, and I'll come on to that a little bit later, that they can challenge, because what they are is they're ultimately responsible for the procedure that we've given to them. But we're not saying to them that that's a rigid procedure that you can't make better, improve, or make it more effective. In terms of risk and safety, we take it very seriously, but we drive it right down into our teams in the field. So my suggestion is that human factor is about making sure that people are 100% aware of risk, not just from an operational perspective, but we share with them the business risk, what is happening at the business level, so they're very much heavily involved in the approval process. We take them through the health, safety and environmental risk aspects, and then we lend it right into the operational risk, so that the individual is 100% risk aware of what their actions could potentially turn out in terms of impact as an incident. Teamwork and communication, highly valuable. I know everyone talks of teamwork, but at the end of the day, we don't profess at any time that an individual's on their own. So any critical switching activity will be done as a pair. So in all instances, even the dry runs and the training, if you have two individuals that are carrying out that activity, even if it's just a training exercise, those two individuals are then responsible for helping each other through that process. So teamwork is very, very highly valued. In terms of learning, I think from a development perspective, the individual has to have the ability to move on. So we make everybody accountable or responsible for the activity, and by doing that, the individual is then buying into what the output is. So we're not telling the individual that that's got to be the output, we're just advising the individual that this is the type of procedure we're looking for, and we're looking for you to come to us with your ideas to make that better. Technical excellence, highly valued as brought. You can't go through the human factor analysis perspective and looking at the way products and processes and people interact without having a degree of technical excellence. And that's just because we deal with technically complicated systems. So we very much highly value that in terms of our culture and our behaviours. And finally, it's constructive behaviours are recognised and valued. So what we say is, don't be afraid to come and challenge, because if you challenge, and it is a constructive challenge that you are challenging us with, then why wouldn't we listen? Why wouldn't we take that on board? That's all about the human interface part. That's understanding the individual. These guys do it day in, day out. We don't do that in terms of the practical side of it. In conclusion, on terms of the risk side of it, is what we say is risk is introduced heavily by human factors. Now, I shared with you previously about our approach to the way we try and blend the 3 Ps, which is people, product and process. It's the interaction of those 3 elements in terms of those 3 Ps that actually ensure that our risk is managed overall. So what we're suggesting is that human factors has to be an integral part of the whole process. And if we go back to some of those urban myths that I shared with you before around clients who believe they can throw a checkbook at a solution, it really is not about the checkbook per se. Obviously you need to spend money to make a system resilient and make a system modern. But we've got, in our experience, we've got 25-year-old infrastructures, and we operate those just as ably as we do an infrastructure that's brand new. And it's all about the way in which the people that are engaged to actually carry out those functions are actually engaged from the point of view of total inclusiveness. So they're included right through the process. They're included through the purchasing, through the product selection, through the product testing, right through to the ultimate operation side of what we do. Often overlooked, I think risk is often overlooked purely because we focus heavily on the statistics of risk. Now, interesting from the previous presentation on tiredness and obviously the fact that you have to be very conscious of the individual and the way they are. We also believe that's correct, because what we do is we actually make sure that we blend any shift patterns. So if we are operating on a 24/7 basis with shift engineers, what we're very conscious of is that the blend of those individuals and their experiences and their knowledge and competency, you won't always get everybody equal. So we try and blend those guys together so that what we get is a total team that's actually the best team we can actually provide. And we do that through a thing called our competency DNA. So we actually measure those individuals. What we then do is we also assess the individuals in terms of making sure that if they are working on particularly difficult projects, they've been involved with a 24/7 activity, we don't encourage those guys to come back into work. So again, just reinforcing what you're saying, that even within the critical environment world, tiredness is a major contributory factor. And the pressures we get from our clients to continually keep a close eye on what we're doing often means that our individuals are working long hours. one thing we believe is risk can never be absolutely 100% eliminated. We can only make it better. We can only improve on it. And what we're trying to always strive to do is we're trying to improve on our human factor element and on our cultural behaviour element, and make sure that we're always accessible. We always ensure that whenever there's an issue, it's not just our technicians that are on hand, it's everybody's on hand. So we really are trying to drive that element of, we know we can't eliminate it, but what we can do is we can make sure that we mitigate it and we continually improve on it. And in terms of significant reduction, I think a little bit more focus on what we do and scrutinising the way in which we actually carry something out, and also being sure that when we certify a particular procedure, we don't sit back and just assume that that procedure is correct in the future. By that continual development and reinventing of what we do, and that continual focus, what we find is that the element of human error within what we do is a lot less. In actual fact, sorry, that's about it for me. Thank you very much.